have provided so much for us, have given us a sense of who we are as a people, as a nation, as a culture. And it's really hard for me not to imagine their being around. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and my whole cultural life was under, if you will, the shadow of the war. Everything from the things I saw on TV to the games I played with the other boys in the neighborhood, developed around this image, this sense. But in some respects, that the war was probably one of the best times for America. We as a people were united. We had a common enemy, a common cause, a common goal. As a little boy, these things excited me, but it also scared me. It scared me because I would read and hear these stories about people in the past, and I would ask myself, would I ever measure up? If the call came to me, would I fall short? Would I be a coward? Would I be willing to give the way others have given in the past? I had a childhood different from a lot of people in that I never went to school with girls until I went to college. I went to all boys schools, and at the age of 12 I was packed off to a boarding school, had a wonderful time. But it was in an atmosphere that's very different from the atmosphere my children were raised in, and most people have these days. I remember going every day to chapel and to assembly, and we would gather in this building, and to me it was huge. I mean, it probably was only the size of this room, but it seemed much bigger at the time. And on the walls were the names of people going back to the Civil War, of the students who had died, the honored dead. And I can remember because the names of the Civil War were faded and you had to look very closely, but the Vietnam War had just ended, or was still going on, and there were fresh names going up on those boards. I look on the alumni magazine and I say they have new names from Iraq and Afghanistan. One of my favorite places to study, if I wanted to get away from it all, was this sundial in one of the gardens, and I would spread my books out and I would write, and every so often I would read the inscription on the sundial. And it was dedicated to the memory of Quentin Roosevelt, a boy who had gone to this school, who in 1917 died in aerial combat over Germany. And he was only at that point, I can remember, 3 years older than I was when I'm sitting at this desk, sitting at this sundial, doing my algebra and thinking, this boy's 18, I'm 15, yet he answered the call. He gave his life. Would I be able to do the same? Howard and I, as you all know, went to the same seminary. And we have a room in the seminary called the refectory, which is the dining hall. And in the ceiling are forks, and on the walls are bits of mashed potato that people would play. And around the room would be these horrendous 19th century portraits. Men who are particularly frightening looking, beards down to here, with very bushy eyebrows. It was not an encouraging place. But they had this one picture of these four men in profile, middle-aged, clean-shaven men, sort of, either in the pictures they have in churches or seminaries, they're either frightening Old Testament-looking people or angels cherubic. These were four ordinary guys in their 40s. And in the background of these four faces in profile was a ship with its prow up and its stern underwater. And I asked one of the people, what's that all about? And they said, I don't know, I asked somebody else. And I finally found out that this was a memorial to the four chaplains. Now, what were the four chaplains? I, who had grown up in the 60s and 70s and had watched all these things, and my whole life as a little boy was informed by this, I didn't know what it was. And the story of the four chaplains is what I want to retell to you now, and how it applies to us as much today as it did in the depths of the war. On February 3rd, 1943, a transport ship, the Dorchester, it had once been a cruise liner that would go down to South America, taking 150 passengers in luxury. But when the war broke out, it was converted into a troop ship. 900 men plus crew packed into this ship. And they would use cruise ships because they were fast. And some of them, like the Queen Elizabeth, never needed a destroyer escort because it could go faster than the submarines chasing it. But this ship had on board over 900 members of a Massachusetts National Guard units. These are boys, from farm boys from western Massachusetts to boys from the south side of Boston, 18, 19. The old guys were 22, 23. Fresh out of high school, fresh off the farm, fresh out of the factory, who had joined up in the moment and the enthusiasm, had gone through their training, and they were part of the vast armada of men and material being sent to England to prepare for the invasion of Europe. And the Dorchester left New York Harbor on the 23rd of January and rendezvoused off of Newfoundland to form up in a convoy. And as the convoy was gathering, a warning was flashed by the Coast Guard escorts saying, submarine activity is expected. And the captain of the Dorchester gave an order that all the bows on board should put their life jackets on, sleeping. Now, if you tell 800 18-year-old kids to put their life jackets on, how many are going to do that? It's hot. Remember, you're in a metal box heated by steam. I can almost imagine it's like my mother-in-law's house in the winter. You've got these big metal radiators. It's freezing outside, but you have these white-hot things, so you're dry, you're sweating, you're nauseous, you're in a metal box, and it stinks, and you've got somebody sleeping that far above you and that far on either side of you. Are you going to put your life jacket on? Well, at 12:55 in the morning, a torpedo struck the Dorchester. And it struck below the water level just in back of the bridge, and it took out all the ship's electrics at once. And a second torpedo struck just in back of that, and the ship began taking on water, and it began to go down fast. Many men were trapped below decks. The steam pipes had burst, and some were scalded as the steam was erupting, and panic ensued. The lifeboats on this were all at the back. What's sinking? The back. And panic ensued. Now, on this ship of 900 teenagers were 4 middle-aged men. Now, this sounds like the beginning of a dumb joke. There's a rabbi, a priest, and 2 ministers. But they weren't walking into a bar. These were ordinary suburban ministers, a suburban priest, a suburban rabbi, who, when the call came, joined the colors to serve their country. These are 40-year-old, 45-year-old, a 50-year-old first lieutenant. I don't give much for their career prospects. Who had joined up, and they were the old men on this boat. Panic broke out. And the 4 chaplains went amongst the men, and they began to calm them down. They helped organize efforts to release those trapped below decks. They didn't have any special engineering skills, mechanical skills, but they were able to go amongst the men. Calm down. Let's orderly file. Let's go up on deck. For those who couldn't find their life jackets, they took off their own. The time came to get in the boats. Okay, you first. You in the boat. You in the boat. Now, in the court-martial of the captain, every time there's a sinking, the captain, if he survives, and the officers undergo a court-martial to understand what happened. And in the testimony taken in that court-martial afterwards, one of the survivors, a 19-year-old boy named Grady Clark, reported that at the last thing he saw, that the Coast Guard had shut off flares so you could see everything as the Coast Guard cutters are surrounding the boat and the rafts trying to pick people up. You could see the 4 chaplains at the very, very tip of that ship, arm in arm, and you could hear, he said, I heard this funny language, I don't know what it was. It was probably Hebrew, or it could have been Latin. But they were praying together, asking God Now, if you didn't have a life jacket and you went into that water just a degree or two above freezing, you were going to die. Not because you were going to drown, but because it was so cold, you've got a minute or two the most. If you had a life jacket, you had a little bit longer because you could at least float until you could get onto a life raft. But these 4 chaplains gave their lives, and gave their spots, and gave their places, all the lifeboats to other people. It's the story of the 4 chaplains. If you should ever go to Army Chaplain College, you're going to be told that story, as how an officer and as a chaplain should behave. Now, let's step back 1 second. Is this rational behavior? Each of these men had 8 to 10 to 12 years of higher education. They had their doctorates, they had their PhDs. They were elite specialists. What is more valuable, an 18-year-old kid from South Boston that you can place in a second, hand him a rifle, or a 40-year-old man with advanced degrees? What's the more valuable choice? Of course, it's the educated officer. But how did they behave? They behaved as Paul would tell us how to behave. None of these men stood on their rights, stood on their dignity, stood on, I am more important than you, therefore I should go first into this lifeboat. Rather, what they did is that they became weak as others were weak. They became insignificant as others were insignificant, not out of shyness, out of love for those for whom they've been called to serve. The 4 chaplains gave their lives out of love. And they didn't, okay, we're going to have the Jews pray here and the Catholics pray here, and he didn't give, now, are you an Episcopalian? Okay, I'll give you your life jacket. It was for fellow men, people they didn't know, people they didn't have relationships with, but people whom God and the United States Army had called them to serve. Would I measure up? Would I be scared and try to get a place in that life? Or would I do what God would have called, what I believe God calls me to do, is to give of myself and to serve? Now, I'm never going to be put in that position. I'm never going to be on a sinking ship. I'm never going to be attacked by the Nazis. But I'm going to be attacked again and again in this life by the actions of Satan in the world. And will I come upright? Will I serve God, or will I go along to get along? Will I try to be a people pleaser, believe in the gospel of nice, try to be popular? Or will I do what I am called to do, which is love God and my neighbor? Each and every one of you and me are called to make the decisions the 4 chaplains made. And it's not really a question of courage. I'm sure they were all scared to death. Nobody wants to die. But they were able to be lifted out of their base fears into something more important. A sense of duty, honor, and courage. These are Christian virtues. The 4 chaplains gave of themselves, as did Quentin Roosevelt in 1917. As did those boys going back to Antietam, or the Marne, or Bastogne, or Quezon, that I would see when I was a little boy on the wall. They did it not because they may have agreed or disagreed. Is Lyndon Johnson right in sending us to Vietnam? It didn't matter. To those whom much has been given, much is expected in this life. These men, these boys, these people, these women who have served our country have been given so much, and then God expects them not to say, look at me and what I have, but to turn around and give it back to something greater than their own egos, to their men, to their country, to God. I probably was that last generation that grew up on the myth of World War II. I sometimes sit down with my children and watch movies, and they have no clue as to the history. Now, my children are not dumb by any means, but we were watching TV, and they said, "Oh, there's the spaghetti guy." And I said, "What are you talking about?" "Him, Paul Newman." For my 20-year-old daughters, Paul Newman is a spaghetti king, because all they know is his face is on salad dressings and spaghetti jars. They don't watch Cool Hand Luke or any sorts of movies like that. The generations are passing by. The idols, the icons, the imagery, it's going to be different from my kids' generation and their kids' generation, but the underlying truths must not change. Integrity, duty, honor. These are things that God calls us to do. They're not Boy Scout words that we can snicker at. There are truths that will never change because they are the truths shared by Jesus Christ. Paul writes about this. I am free under Jesus Christ. I don't care what anybody thinks about me. I am free from popular opinion and prejudices and what these people think and what those people think. But because I am free, I choose to be a slave to others so that they may know the glory of Jesus Christ. This is sacrifice. And this is what we are all called to do. It may be as simple as not getting mad at the little old lady in front of you at Publix when she wants to pay by check and has forgot her driver's license. It may be giving that last handicapped spot away. It may be responding to that nut in the car next to you with love rather than a finger. But living a life of love is what Christ calls us to do. Friends, I don't think any of us need worry about dying at sea or dying at war. But we are all going to be called to face the test. And it's the same test, be a little one or a big one. Will you be faithful to what God has called you to do? Be faithful. Amen. Friends, would you please stand and join with me in saying that